Hello everyone. Good morning. Thank you everyone for coming out on this beautiful sunny Saturday morning. Today we've gathered on Kaurna country, and I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations peoples of Ghana as the first artists, scientists and technologists, and pay respect to any First Nations peoples that are in this room and also that have been part of this project, particularly Brad DARKSON, who is in Melbourne at the moment with his show at ACA, which he had to go down and install, and it opens today. So Brad apologises he can't be here today, but he is here very much in presence if you have a look at his work in the gallery, and also there's some more video work online on the digital catalogue and writing in this catalogue that you can enjoy. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping before we go into the conversation proper. So the bathrooms are just outside these doors here, and you go down the corridor and to your right. And we are adjusting and trying to get the air conditioning to a temperate temperature, but it's a machine, and so it's not listening to us as we'd like it to. So it may get hot and it may get cold. So if you need to leave the room, please feel free to leave the room at any time. And there is some water and juice on the back table as well. I'm going to just frame the program today for you. I'll introduce each of our 4 artists that are here today on the panel. And then each of the artists is going to talk for about 5 minutes about introducing their work and also talking about their work in context of the exhibition that's in the Newmarch Gallery. This is a really big project that's been going for a year, and the exhibition component of it is almost the last public outcome of the project. So again, thank you so much for coming along. And a partnership for uncertain times has been made possible through Arts South Australia and is a partnership between the University of South Australia and the Australian Network for Art and Technology, ANAT. So first of all, I'm going to introduce very briefly everybody by name, and then we'll go deeper into the discussions. I have Deirdre Feeney here, and Deirdre is the key lead artist in this project and also is attached to the University of South Australia. Catherine Truman, Ian Gibbins, who is Catherine's co-conspirator and collaborator, and Niki Sperou. So if we could just do a round of applause to welcome. Deirdre, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself and then tell us about your practice generally, and we'd like to hear more about your work in the exhibition and also how you've been working with the concepts of this project around the themes of uncertainty and also some of the vulnerabilities in that in terms of process-driven experimental practice.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. So hi everyone, thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning. My name is Deirdre Feeney, and I'm an artist and lecturer in the Contemporary Art Program at the University of South Australia in the UniSA Creative faculty. Just before I share about my project, I just want to acknowledge that we're gathered here on unceded Kaurna lands, and I really want to pay respect to the long time knowledge systems of those people and what they can share and what we can learn from them. So my part of the project, so I developed the artistic component investigating perceptual illusions. So it's about an exploration of how I can achieve depth of field in materially generated projected moving images. And you can see in the exhibition there are 2 works that I've kind of gone deep into process to explore those concepts. And I'm working across this idea of, I'm bringing together, I guess, or intertwining a lot of different components. So I'm working across optics, media archaeology, then I'm kind of realizing the works through digital fabrication. And of course, then I'm really interested in how these works engage the human perceptual system. And these works came about really kind of trying to push further two strands of my practice that I've been working on for quite a while. So one is that notion is how can I achieve depth of field in a projected image? So, and this really comes from my background as a glassmaker, where I'd spent years kind of learning how to control light, so how light engages with the material, so how much you can let through an optical object and how much an object can kind of hold, and how that affects the projected image. And also investigating this idea of focal planes. And so where the human perceptual system thinks about if something is in sharp focus, we register that as being at the foreground of an image. But if something is slightly more blurred, we kind of register that as being in the background. So you can create the illusion of 3D just by kind of playing around with those ideas. And then also I was really interested in pushing that further into a moving image, because that's another part of my practice where I look at historical image artifacts and kind of I glean things from those. For example, the works in the exhibition, the two kind of apparatus, the center point is they have a mirrored polygon, and so that comes from a 19th century apparatus that was invented by an artist and engineer, Charles-Émile Renaud. And why I was interested in his apparatus was because he generated moving images through the movement of light. So rather than mechanical movement, he used what I call optical mechanics. So I was really interested in that. So in terms of this idea, bringing this into the theme of the overall project of uncertainty and revealing process. So when I started exploring kind of my ideas and trying to push them further, I was never sure of what was going to work. And in fact, there was a lot of failure along the way. So I was constantly reiterating to see where the process would take me. And so I was modeling and 3D printing the optical components. So there was a lot of trial and error. And then that revelation of process, particularly in the exhibition, was very new to me, because normally I don't show work until I think it's finished. So that made me feel quite vulnerable in terms of sharing work with public audience. But I think part of the process for me was also revealing the process of how we see what we see. So the works that you'll see in the exhibition, they reveal exactly how the image is being produced.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deirdre. And we'll come back to you later on and we'll do a deep dive and hear more about this experience and project from you. So thank you for that. Catherine, over to you.
Where do you start for 5 minutes to unveil such an incredible project like this? It's been an extraordinary experience, but before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge too that we have been doing all this work on Kaurna land, and that there is still much to learn about the depth, what that means, particularly where our project is sited, which is up in Carrick Hill, and an iconic estate. And I'm very pleased to have one of the main gardeners here, John. Thanks for coming, John. It's been an amazing project. In the beginning, I'd already had a relationship with the building, the iconic kind of English manor home that's sited right in the middle of the estate, surrounded by very cultivated formal gardens, and then there's this kind of liminal zone where it's sometimes it is managed, but it's much more unstructured land. And then there's this rim of endangered grey box grassy woodland, which is an extraordinary band of land around Carrick Hill. So for me, I was already doing a project there called The Arrangements Assembling Nature. The exhibition is just finished yesterday. And I had a relationship in the sense that I got to know the people who valued that place, and the extraordinary relationship between the house, the garden, and what is remnant bushland. So that's a foundation of my choices to call this project the Taken Path. There's a path that bisects the estate that goes from the east to the west and leads to the house. One end leads to a pencil pine, a very important pencil pine, and the other path leads to an ancient grey box eucalypt. And so it traverses all those different kinds of managed and unmanaged lands. And I hung the whole project on a very simple premise, which was, what would we notice if we walked that path once a month and we filmed our journey and we filmed whatever conditions were present? And at that point I invited a colleague, really, Ian Gibbins, who I've been working with for many years. Ian was the head of anatomy and histology up at Flinders University, a neuroscientist, and now a world-renowned video poet. So with all those, strings to his bow, it was a very important decision for me to invite Ian into the project. So he could, the relationship was already established, and I find with collaborations of this nature, it's those initial stages that take a very long time to establish trust between the people in a collaboration. And for this project, I wanted to skip that in a sense, but open up the possibilities of expanding our processes from the very different disciplines that we represent. And it was risky because I really wanted it to be unstructured, and I think it'd be interesting to hear Ian's point of view of his feelings in those initial months. All I remember is Ian saying a lot, I think we need a bit more structure. Me saying, let's just hang with it. Let's just delay our response in a sense. Because we always, as artists, as scientists, we always jump in. Sometimes I wonder, actually now, because of my experience of the whole process of this year, I wonder whether we perhaps even subliminally have a context that guides us so much in our process that the outcomes are kind of a little bit predetermined in a sense. With this project, I really wanted to throw that open, and the only structure we had was that I was going to use an iPhone and Ian was going to use his a bit more fancy video camera, and we were going to film what was ever present once a month for a whole year. So what you see in the gallery is a result of hanging back, of a delayed response, which has actually been incredibly fertile. The layers that just hanging back and just observing, the layers that have been uncovered have been incredible. And we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Catherine. Ian, over to you. And that Catherine gave you a nice segue there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I won't say too much, so it's time so Niki gets a chance too. So Catherine's already given a fantastic introduction to the project. She had a bit of a head start on me in the sense that she was already working at Carrick Hill. So in terms of the structure versus unstructured when we started, Catherine already had some sort of view of how the place worked. I knew Carrick Hill from just going there as a punter, just as a visitor, but I hadn't thought about going there on a sort of regular level the way that we did. For me, it's been a fantastic project and it's still going, as Catherine said. And in the context of this overall project, the uncertainty of it all is something that I really love. Coming from a science background, we're in uncertainty all the time. We never know what's happening most of the time, despite what you end up writing up in the publications. I think one of the great things in common between artists and scientists is that you actually enjoy working in that area of uncertainty, trying to navigate it and work out where its boundaries are. So there were lots of uncertainties in this project. When we started, as I said, we had a whole bunch of ideas how it might go, but we really didn't know how it was going to end up and how the final product was going to look. So until I rendered the final videos, like a week before we installed it, I'd never actually seen the whole 12 or 10 months worth of videos all together or running at the same time, because it takes hours and hours and hours to render it. So that was one level of uncertainty. But the other level of uncertainty, there were two other levels. One is the actual process of the recording. And I'm interested in the technology of the recording processes, or the digital technology. I used to work with all of that. And it's a fake. What you see is not what you get. And what you see is not the experience that you have as a person. So how on earth were we going to represent this space that we spent so much time in every month, at the time we spend there, and all of the things that happen around the edge of what when we walk down that path? So there's a lot of uncertainty there in how you represent it. What do you represent? And when we do represent something that you see in the gallery, how do you respond to it? How do you people respond to it? How do we respond to it the 10th time we've seen it, or the 15th time we've seen it? And it's different every time, and it depends on context and all sorts of other things. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. And the other bit of uncertainty, which was a real surprise to me, was about Carrick-Hill itself. And we were most have been there, going there out of hours when before it's open to the public. And it's a completely different place. And it's wonderful having John here as one of the people who works there, because the amount of work which goes into making Carrick-Hill the place that it is when you go there as a visitor, the amount of work behind the scenes is incredible. And for me, it's been an absolute revelation. It's been wonderful seeing John and his colleagues working there away. And one of the things you think about going to Carrick-Hill, it's a nice quiet place for out of hours. It's really, really noisy. So we had, Catherine and I also had these sort of different visions of Carrick-Hill. Catherine being there as an artist, me being there as a visitor, being there out of hours, and now putting together this project. How do we represent all of that?
Thank you so much. I went to Carrick-Hill for the first time a few weeks ago and did spend time in the garden and walking around and making love to the hedges. The hedges were just so beautiful. I had to walk around touching them all, and it's a very kind of tactile, beautiful, sensory place, and very alive and vibrant. So it would have been an incredible place to work in, and we'll talk more about that later on. Niki, I'm handing over to you now. This is Niki Sperou.
Thank you.
You could tell us a bit. Thanks.
I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on Kaurna land today, and I'd like to thank ANAT and UniSA and all of the artists in the project, and particularly Deirdre for coming up with the concept along with ANAT and UniSA. Thanks very much for having me, and thanks to you for being here today. My project is titled Mesh, Interspecies Empathy, and the term mesh was chosen because I wanted to adopt as many voices as I could into my work, because within a collaboration, I think it's very important to enable people to have a say, and for the say to be non-hierarchical. And when you are working within institutions, sometimes the positions that people hold can be quite intimidating. So for me, an important thing is to open up science to all people and to bring in different knowledges and to allow different people to have a say. So within my practice, I manipulate live media in an art context, and I've been an artist in residence at particularly the Centre for Marine Bioproducts Development at Flinders, but also at other places, RAOs, on shorter residencies. And I find that the people I deal with can vary quite a lot, And sometimes these collaborations can be easy and sometimes they can be difficult. But I think the challenge of working through the difficulties makes the work quite worthwhile, and just allowing for difference is very important. I've developed an interest in what it means to be biological in an era of contemporary technologies, and through intimate interrogation with living organisms on both the micro and macro scale, I've been, in both the micro and macro scale, and by that I mean sometimes I will see things under the microscopes, and sometimes I will see how things are influencing the broader environment. And because technology is having an impact on living things, either on a small scale or large scale, I think on either end of the spectrum it's very important that we're responsible for our actions. And an example of this is the plastics problem. And this has called the great impact of the plastics problem has now made these inanimate things have an agency of their own, so that plastics have almost become a living thing. And so that really changes what possibly you can identify as a collaboration, as even though it's an inanimate thing, it can be seen as a type of collaborator. And within my work, I'm very interested in what differences in collaboration can look like, from either organic, human, non-human, technological components, other scientists, people perhaps with different identities. And all of these voices mesh into this rhizomatic background to my work, which I find quite enriching and fulfilling. But across the themes of my work, I'm also looking for a reframing of past histories, of past thoughts, because I really do think that a type of healing is necessary. So when you look at the images in the exhibition, I speak about wounds in a lot of different contexts, from a physical wound to an emotional wound to a metaphorical wound, a mythical wound, and all these perspectives for me come into a very poetic narrative. And for interspecies empathy, as I said, I've meshed with collaborators, as I said before, non-human, queer, scientists, religious myth makers and archaeologists, to reframe knowledge and to heal wounds, and just to identify the context in which the work was made. The marine algal byproducts, biopolymers and bioplastics as alternative to regular plastics were made with the Centre for Marine Bioproducts Development at Flinders, and my collaborators there were Peng Su, who's a biotechnologist under the guidance of Professor Wei Zhang, and also the Skin Bible was piggybacked onto that project, and that was made with religious myth maker M. Dudek that I met in 2013 in Winnipeg. And even though the project was delayed many, many years, we finally got to work together this year and to meet in person. So I think one of the interesting developments of the project is that we will be able to also work together physically, but also in virtual reality spaces. So I'm really looking forward to meeting my collaborator again.
Niki, thank you. I'm going to keep moving on. Thank
Okay,
you
sorry,
so much.
but I didn't realise how long I was speaking for.
No, you were perfectly on time. Thank you. And it leads to where we'll go next. I think we'll bring the microphone to Deirdre. I'm going to go back to the very start of this project a year ago, and we started off with an in-person workshop at the University of South Australia with each of the artists and the ANAT team, and we worked with mostly uni essay students from across disciplines in a workshop day. And we workshopped a whole range of questions around the ideas of partnership for uncertain times, and it was one of our starting points and prompts, I think, for the work of this project. So I'm going to take us back there with some of the questions and some of our provocations from that day, and stemming on from what you've all been talking about here that's coming through really strongly in the project is collaboration and multidisciplinary collaboration. So Deirdre, I want you to expand on how collaborative processes, and particularly multidisciplinary collaborative processes, have been really important in your work, and if you could tell us a little bit about that collaborative experience.
So my work probably wouldn't exist in the form it is in currently without collaboration. So I'm really interested in bringing multiple kind of sets of expertise, multiple perspectives, multiple ways of knowing into my work to give a kind of more multi-dimensional experience, I guess, to people engaging with the work. And so I work, for a number of years now, I've been working with optical physicists, and in more recent times I'm working with fabrication engineers, so that enables me to make the precision optical components for the work. So they would be my two, so working across that kind of art, science and fabrication divide. I also think that that's from my point of view as a participating artist in the project, but that multidisciplinary collaboration was a really strong point for me to actually develop the project with ANAT in the first place, because I feel really strongly that artists who work in general, not just myself, who work across disciplines, there's this constant renegotiation with collaborators, especially from different points of view. And you've all spoken about that as well, those challenges. And sometimes they're more difficult than others. But what I found so this kind of revelation of that multidisciplinary process was very important in terms of the overall kind of concept of the project. So it's almost an invitation to you as the audience to see how those kind of negotiations and collaborations work, because they are uncertain, they're not predetermined. When you start a project with your collaborator, you don't really know where it's going to end up. And for me personally, on my collaborative journey as part of this project, I was doing a lot of my optical testing in a photonics lab, working with photonics, like physicists. And I noticed the conversation really began to change, maybe 2/3 the way through the project. And I was very open to kind of their point of view, but they were also very open to my point of view. So something happened in that space in between, which was really interesting. And for me also, I find with this kind of cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary collaboration, when my collaborators have a physical artifact that they can see, so I would start off with models and prototypes and drawings, and we would have discussions around that. But when there's a physical thing in the world, that becomes the kind of focus of the discussion, and everyone gathers around that with their different points of view, something happens, something changes, and something almost clicks in this new space, and then everybody kind of invests towards that central kind of artifact or artwork. And that's the point in collaboration that I love. I really enjoy that. But I never know quite when that's going to happen or how it's going to happen.
And it requires a great degree of openness on behalf of yourself as the artist, also working with your collaborators. We've found in partnerships and collaborative projects, you have to go in with an open mind and not center yourself as the artist, and be open to it actually being a dialogue, and that different skill sets coming together have the same you talked about the non-hierarchical think, I think, Niki. And I'm interested in hearing more from Niki, because you have worked for quite a few years in the lab directly with hard scientists. And when I say hard scientists, I mean that concept of Western science. So tell us a bit about those communication styles and barriers and the ways that you've worked in that kind of environment in your collaborations. And also recently with M. Dudek, I'm really interested in the Skin Bible work. So if you can touch on just how you work as a collaborative artist, that would be amazing.
I think initially you just need to take the time to immerse yourself in each other's process, because when I first started at the lab, everyone talks about learning a new language, and it is a new language. And in the workshops that I teach, I actually have a component where I say, are we speaking the same language? And we go through different words and we explain what does that mean to a scientist and what does that mean to an artist, and it can mean totally different things. So first of all, we have to immerse ourselves with each other and make sure we both have a similar understanding. Second, I find that metaphor is very important in understanding each other, because if you can find common ground through metaphor, I think even Aristotle talks about, if you want to explain something to someone who doesn't know about something, find something that you both know to give an essence to the unknown thing, if that makes sense. So I often will speak in metaphors to other scientists, and we find that really helps us to communicate. And the third thing about finding a visual language, as I think you're speaking about, Deirdre, I actually found that in helping scientists with visual literacy, they were not only able to speak in a more visceral way to me, but also to communicate their processes to other scientists once they became more attuned in visual language. So I think visual language is a very potent way of communicating. Now, with working with a collaborator that is also another artist, I mentioned this to Catherine just before in the foyer, one would think that would be easier, but actually no, because we're treading on each other's turf. And so, again, there are the same agendas, like people have a different thing that they want to achieve. But I think in finding common ground and working out things that will satisfy both partners, in the end, the outcome is very rich and rewarding.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ian and Catherine, so you've been firm collaborators on this project and have had a relationship of trust built up over some time. So tell me, Catherine and Ian, both of you, how this collaboration has been symbiotic in a way that, how have you helped each other see differently and looking through each other's eyes at the same thing, but seeing the same thing differently?
Yeah, really interesting question. Thanks, Melissa. I'm really interested in taking a couple of steps back, even from using metaphors to try and communicate. And it's more about, because of this project in particular, it's made me compare it right back to how do we become aware in the first place, of the things that we find compelling in the last place, What's that journey between the initiation of an idea through to pursuing, trying to become clearer in our understanding of that idea. And as scientists and artists, we probably have different starting points and that we've never even thought about before. And my process has always been about hanging way back, almost just being like the dust in the air in a new environment, to just float, not be too intrusive, to try and learn as much as I can, what affects me, what doesn't affect me, from a very personal point of view, whilst I'm learning the differences between us. And luckily, I've been in environments that have allowed that level of trust even before they know me. There's always the question of, what are you going to do here? Why are you here? And I just go, I'm really interested in what you do. And that's my beginning point. And I think then that starts to alleviate that tension of fear between you, because usually in new environments, you're fearful of the new environment. They're fearful of you on lots of different levels. But to just say, I'm really interested in what you do. And usually I'm lucky that I've been able to start with, this is what I do. You know, they've asked me to talk about my work. I just lay it on the line, and I kind of know a bit about why I'm interested in their work. That's the starting point. But there's a whole lot more to learn. And this project has been about the learning of those things. What does it take to hang right back, to not step in front all the time and get in the way of yourself, open up the possibilities that are there? That's what this project's about for me.
Fantastic. Ian, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. So in lots of ways, this collaboration on this particular project, it's a bit different from even the previous projects we've worked together. In previous projects we've done together, we've sort of had a pretty good idea of why we were doing it, what we were going to do, and who was going to be involved and all the rest of it. And in that respect, our previous collaborations have been much more like the types of collaborations you have all the time, working in a big science lab like I did for most of the time. Everybody's got their bit of expertise, everybody knows something about something, you've got some sort of overlap, and you may or may not get on, but you've got a job to do, so you get on with it anyway. And hopefully something better than the sum of the parts comes out. But this has been different because, first of all, Catherine and I know each other well, worked together for a long time, so we sort of know more or less our approaches. And we agreed quite early on to this approach which Catherine just explained. And for me, the major component of the collaboration was just turning up each month with no idea what we're going to find, other than the fact it might be raining or not. And even that was a difficult choice sometimes, because we couldn't film if it was raining, but that was just part of it. We just thought, well, yeah, that's part of it. So one of the collaborations was clearly having our different viewpoints and what was happening on that day, and then coming back and reviewing all the footage. What are we going to do with it? Well, we might do this or we might do that. So there's the shared complementary viewpoints was a key part of it. But the other collaborator is the actual place itself. And that's really, really important. I mean, we wouldn't have a project if it weren't for Carrickhill. And if we went somewhere else and did exactly the same thing, walked a path for a month, once a month for a year, we'd end up with a completely different project. So the Carrickhill and all the stuff which is embedded in it is to me is a really important collaborator, and that goes back from, to the original Ghana country through to what's going to happen with climate change in 5 years' time.
It's interesting that nature and Carrickhill and the site and the house are a collaborator on the project as well. And also that your roles within this project as artists, scientists and artists, Ian, you're also a poet and a performer and a creative practitioner as well as a scientist. Your roles in this have been somewhat around being the observer as well. And Catherine, in your work, you're standing back, as you were saying, and you're reflecting and you're observing. And through those walking that path in that longitudinal project, you observed the changes that were happening around you, so treading lightly as well. I think that was a really important part of your project. There's almost this whispering that's happening around it, that you're this human in this landscape and in this kind of everywhen, I'm going to use that term, as the observer, and then you're bringing that into a gallery and into writing and in other layers of the project to show others just little fragments of that. And I think you do, each of you do that in your project. As we've got a Q&A coming up in 10 minutes, so everybody get your questions ready. But before we go to the Q&A, I'm really interested, because this project was a partnership for uncertain times. And when Deirdre hatched it up, and her and I had the first conversation around this project, we were in peak pandemic mode. Deirdre had just crossed the border out of isolation. I'd just arrived in Adelaide after 3 quarantines from Vietnam. So we were in this place of uncertainty. There were things breaking all around the world. We're all in these shared but differing kind of experiences of uncertainty. And so this project stemmed from that. But what it's beautifully maintained and done and interrogated over the last 12 months is the basic premise that uncertainty is every moment, it's all around us. And humans often think that we have things under control and that we know what's going on, but we don't. We're just doing our best from moment to moment to moment. And I think the artists and collaborators in this project have really explored pushing that space and pushing those boundaries of, they don't know what's next, but making what's next as it happens within their projects. So I'm going to ask Catherine, you've got the microphone, about this, the context of uncertainty in this project and in your own practice, and some of your experiences around that and where you think that's going to lead next for you.
I'm lucky that I get to mentor a lot of young artists, and they often ask that question that a lot of artists get: where do you get your ideas from? And how do you know what you're going to do in these cases where there's an immense amount of subject matter? How do you sift through all that subject matter and make what you make? The absolutely true and honest answer to that is, I don't know. And that is the hardest thing to say to a young artist, because they always think that that path is a certain path, and it's actually not. I think as I get older, I feel more and more uncertain in the beginning of a project than I ever have. And once that used to be very unnerving, and I guess I've learnt to trust it now, that something will unfold. And what this project has taught me is that delaying that thing that you think you know at the beginning, just delaying that, not stepping into the gap with answers, but in fact forming more questions, is so compelling, and it's the basis of humanity. Absolutely.
It's about listening as well as observation. I'm hearing that, pardon the pun. So you have to create that space for reflection and for things to unfold at their own pace. Niki, how about you? Because you work with in the lab with a lot of materiality.
Just building on what Catherine's saying as well, I think if there's not uncertainty in the project that you're doing, you're not trying hard enough. You're too comfortable. So if you're working and you think, oh, everything's going swimmingly to plan, you're not challenging yourself hard enough, you're not taking risks, and you're not applying the scrutiny that to your process that you should be doing. Now, with the materiality, yes, things, especially when you're working with organic materials, they have their own agency. And many times I'll set up an experiment the night before, and I'm sure you've seen this. Sometimes you hold your breath in anticipation, and you open the incubator and you see, have they done what I anticipated? And it's either like, oh, fantastic, or it's initially failure, but then we've spoken that failure sometimes is the best way to learn something new. Well, why did that happen differently, and what can I learn from that? So I think that's the most exciting thing about materiality. And also, because we come from outside, we can also use physical objects in ways that they weren't designed for. We can find creative alternatives, and we can hack the processes, we can hack the uses, and that's really exciting too.
I love that, thank you. I was in the lab with you, Deirdre, with the lab you've been working in on this project and in your work, and one of the engineers in the lab came to a 3D printing machine that you and I were standing next to with a tray, and I said, what are you doing? And in that tray he was sprouting 3D printed or printed heart tissue, and they were doing experiments on the heart tissue for people who, the experiments for COVID vaccinations of people with heart issues. So this experimentation was happening with these heart tissues they'd printed, and they were sprouting, which was just incredible. And that's where Deirdre was working side by side with that level of research. So Deirdre, please share with us some of your experiences around working in those processes of uncertainty in this project in the lab.
So I think, you know, as Melissa said, when we first came up with this, the idea for the project, we were still in the pandemic. And I feel like the pandemic was this threshold, and uncertain times, all of a sudden, we entered the world of uncertain times. Of course, we had been using the term before, but now, you know, you pick up any form of media, listen to anything, that phrase, uncertain times. And for me, my practice has always dwelled in uncertainty. In fact, I relish it. And so I think for me, it's really interesting where in, say, the public discourse, that uncertainty has a negative connotation, because people, that idea of doubt or uncertainty or not knowing or not being able to predict the outcome, I think for me as an artist practicing, it's all about that. So it's about that curiosity and that idea of working with uncertainty. It's like, well, what if I do this? What happens if I do this? And then for me, that's more connected to wonder rather than this negative thing of, oh, I don't know, I can't control. And, you know, of course, that can be, that's quite a broad brushstroke of kind of, you know, looking at the idea of uncertainty. But I think that's very much how I explore uncertainty in my practice. And like the American writer Toni Morrison, who said that this idea, when you want to try something, but it doesn't work the way you thought it would work. And the way she frames that as failure. So again, failure can be linked to uncertainty, but for her, failure is just another form of information. So when you try something, and then you're just open to what happens, and then you learn from that, and then try again, or embed that, so you keep kind of learning. And I think that's the crux of uncertainty for me. And I also think in general, you know, artists very much live uncertain lives. They live in a certain precarity of, you know, kind of finding the next project, the funding. So there's that part of it as well. But definitely in terms of process, and I thrive on uncertainty.
And there's a certain visual language that you are developing and using allegory and metaphor. And I think through this project and that concept, there's that message that in those spaces of the unknown and wonder and curiosity and the not knowing is a good space for humanity to be at this moment in time. We're testing things out and we're creating what the future looks like, and we're in this space where the decisions we make are more and more vital to creating those shared futures that are great places for humans and all life forms to be living and thriving in. So I think this language that you're creating of wonder, curiosity, experimentation, process, and valuing that, particularly as artists, as work as well. This was another part of the project for me, was to value the work of artists and create opportunities for artists to be acknowledged as professional practitioners and be given that workspace to work in over the year. So that's been super important.
Can I just add something to that?
You may.
So I think also the notion of uncertainty, particularly in multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary practice, so it gives you that dexterity to recalibrate or renegotiate or re-navigate. And I think that's something, you know, in these uncertain times that we're living in, instead of being anxious about that we have to change or adopt, I think the more we dwell in that space and the more times we have to adapt, we have to change, we have to reassess, particularly with all the, you know, these wicked problems facing us, and, you know, including AI. I think in some regards, and I think this project is one of the aims of the project, is revealing that dexterity and that dwelling in uncertainty, and actually how it can reframe that notion of uncertainty for kind of public audiences.
It's a superpower, and I think we will hand over to the Q&A now. And I have Oshaf somewhere with a microphone, and so if I'm opening up to the floor, if anybody from the audience has a question, please raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. A question for the panel generally, or just a general question? Oshaf, we have a question from Carolyn here.
Hello. Thanks, Osaf. I have a question for Deirdre. During the project, you talked a lot about how making visible this experimentation was making you feel quite vulnerable and a little bit exposed, and that was an uncomfortable feeling. So I'm interested to know, now that we're almost at the end and the show is up and looking spectacular, how do you feel about being exposed as far as behind the scenes being shown?
Great question. Yeah, now that I've gone through the process and the exhibition is up and the works are out in the world, I think I'm feeling maybe not less vulnerable, but it's like I've reframed my vulnerability. And so instead of, I've let go of the idea that, you know, the works, being uncomfortable that the works aren't finished, but instead I'm looking at the works as a starting point for a conversation, or a starting point for a dialogue with the viewers, but also between me and my practice. So I think it's kind of shifted that. And also, it's also allowed me to reposition the works into, of course, they're here at a Newmarch Gallery, but also maybe it's not quite clear what they are, where they sit. There's actually an uncertainty of what they are. And I think that's okay. Like, yeah.
Do you still have your microphone, Carolyn? I'd just like you to repeat the question, please.
Thanks, Deirdre. I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts on that vulnerability too, of showing the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Yeah, particularly as it was a process-driven experimental project and the work's not necessarily finished. So yes, Catherine, we'd like to hear from you about that.
I think I've been learning for many years now to kind of almost undo my process, and that is my work, in the sense that I feel it's important to take apart an artwork almost for an audience sometimes, not all the time, mind you, but I think it's really, there's a lot of separation between the general public and an art gallery even, and it shouldn't be like that. Art is so much a part of our lives, and we don't, I think there's a dislocation, but exhibitions like this and projects like this are addressing, you know, at grassroots level. I think it's really important to talk about how you function as a human being and how that's translated into an artwork. In fact, that becomes the way that you're thinking, I think artists are a bit like sponges in a sense. And I think that that's really important to convey to an audience, that it's not a final, mystical, difficult, distant thing that you do, that you're a part of the general public, you're a member of the general public, and you think like this, and that then you're inviting the audience or another person to say, what do you think? I think that's what this show's about. What do you think? It's not about all, what we all think, it's about what you're thinking as well. It should be like that.
Yeah, and we had people at the opening, which was a couple of Friday nights ago, who'd never been in a gallery before, which I thought was incredible. Some of your collaborators and some other people from your communities and the community came along for the first time. And I know, Deirdre, that some people contacted you and said, what happens there? What do I do? What do people do? And I thought that was incredible, that we had people who ended up staying all night with big smiles on their faces, that people were in this space and stepping over that invisible threshold for the first time. Ian, we'll go to you to respond to Carolyn's question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, there's always a vulnerability of presenting anything in public, sitting here. And as scientists, we present our work to each other as in scientific conferences all the time, and it's still one of the scariest things you can ever do, is get up in front of a bunch of your peers and tell them what you've just done, and with no real certainty, go back down to certainty, if it's actually any good or not, or if it's as good as you thought it was, or whatever like that. So that's always there. And when I first started doing art stuff, so like performing poetry, or the first time we did a gallery exhibition, I've never been more scared in my life as the first opening night of our first show. I thought, what's this going to be like? I had no idea. So having said all of that, I think any public presentation is a vulnerability. But the idea of opening up the process behind it, behind what we do, as scientists or as artists or as anything else that we do in life, architects or designers or camera people, knowing how it works behind the scenes, I just love that personally. To find out how things work is, I suppose, what makes me a scientist, but I think it also makes people artists too. You're trying to figure out how things work, and to show other people how you got to where you are, or how far off track you are, or whatever the case may be, I think is a real treasure, and I don't think it's valued enough. And I get really grumpy sometimes with some people who say, well, it's a finished work, it just stands as it is. No, but it might, but there's a whole lot more other stuff you can get out of it, and I think people can learn a lot more about not only about other people, about how the world works by understanding the process which goes into making and creating things.
It's definitely a conversation, and everybody who is the viewer at this intersection of going into an exhibition, they're bringing their own layer and understanding and reading to it as well, which may differ completely from your intention, which I think is another beautiful layer to this kind of work. Niki?
Okay, this idea of stepping over the invisible boundary, as you put it, goes both ways, not only for a scientist coming into our space, but for us going into their space. And it's been a very clear intention of mine for many years to break down that boundary, to help people step over it. And that's the reason why for many years I've been developing and facilitating bioart workshops in which I bring interested others and artists into the science art space in order for them to have a physical experience of it. Sometimes I actually design little eureka moments within the workshop because I sometimes we don't question why we are somewhere or what's happening, and when you as artists, we can actually help people to look more critically at the environment and what's happening within a space.
Yeah, critical thinking and critical looking is key.
Can I just say one more thing that from something Niki said then. We used to often have in our labs, we'd have school kids come through or visitors coming through who are interested in some nature of science or want to maybe donate money to it or something like that. And one of the things we used to do is take people down to have a look at our fancy microscopes or something like that. And I would routinely set up something that was just part of one of the experiments that was going on in the lab at the time. So I had no idea when we turned on the instrument, really no idea what we were going to see. And you have a bunch of kids or some visitors come in and say, look at this. No one's ever seen this before in the whole history of life on Earth. And that sort of revelatory experience, which comes directly out of the environment, is a really important thing, I think. And I think stepping back from that, going back to where we are here, and maybe enlarging a bit on Catherine's comment about galleries versus more public open space, is that, one of the things a gallery can do is to allow a portal into the minds of the artists, into the work that they're doing. And I think that sort of often probably isn't taken advantage of as much as it could sometimes.
Yeah. Over to the audience again. Oh, hello. Oshaf, the person who's the gardener and the caretaker of Carrick Hill. Oh.
Hey, just first, thanks everyone for coming. I guess my question is, you've called this whole project Uncertain Times. And for me, I think these are uncertain times. You look around, and I guess I'm just wondering from all your perspectives, interacting with the world you do you feel right now is more uncertain than other times, throughout your careers? Just talking about the world more broadly. Is that something you're picking up as you interact with everybody?
Perfect, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever felt more precarious than any other time in my life than I do now. And I think it's a matter of trying to deal with that fear of the unknown, the uncertain that is all pervading. But somehow we have to not let that fear rule all our decision making. Otherwise, we won't be able to think of a hopeful future. The other thing is that I think there's a lot of onus on experts to come up with answers. And you know what? I think it's going to be down to you and I. That's what my feeling is now, and I feel that that's what this project has opened up. It's down to you and I, ordinary people, to make small steps,
Deirdre, would you like to respond to that question?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think we've always lived in uncertain times, but I think uncertainty has become more visible, obviously, through huge issues such as climate change, AI, war, etc. I think also very much this uncertainty is hitting the Western world and becoming more visible, and I think it was very much already there. People were grappling with it in non-Western societies for a very long time. For me personally, in terms of my practice and how I think about that, I think it's helpful as an artist to kind of look it in the eye, stare it in the face, rather than being afraid of it. So almost being curious, well, what is this? What does it mean? And with my practice, I'm very much interested in this idea of how the technologically mediated image affects or engages with human perception, changes it, controls it in a way. And now that we have AI upon us and with us, what does that mean for the human experience of images? So I think that's something that I will be, spending a lot of time in these uncertain times with.
Thank you. We'll go to Niki. And as the microphone's going to Niki to respond, and part of this project, part of the joy for me as one of the partner organisations is I'm a massive fan of multidisciplinary thinking, and I think these kind of projects gives us as participants and audiences and people who are engaged in it to understand that concept of multidisciplinary thinking and how we can as individuals kind of be prepared to exist and live and navigate uncertain territories and uncertainty times. And I'm not saying that you have to be 100%, I'm a warrior of the future all the time, but to understand that you can talk to other people and you can take that time and you can observe and you can sense what's going on and try to make sense of that. And I think they're really important processes to understand that we can bring in different ways of thinking to look at solutions to the same problem.
I think we've always lived with uncertainties through changes in climate and what have you. I think what the difference is due to technology is the acceleration of change. I think we're living in an era of acceleration that we've never seen before, and this can be extremely unnerving. With any new technology, as Deirdre said, it's always associated with fear, because we always find that no matter what we design, there is always the unexpected. And this lag between understanding and expectation can be quite unnerving. I agree that we need different viewpoints in order to understand change, and inertia is not the answer. To do nothing is never the answer. We need to seek hopeful narratives and strategies in order to undo some of the wrongs that we've done, or to perhaps find ways to support a future in which we can negotiate comfortably. So, unfortunately, we're just stuck feeling uncertain.
Yeah, uncertain to be uncertain. I think we have another question from the audience. Jen.
This is a question for the panel. Considering the juxtaposition between art and technology, how do you see the relationship manifesting, firstly, within the next 10 years, and secondly, in the future beyond the next 10 years?
Thank you for that question. Niki, you have the microphone. So
Great
the question was, as artists, how do you see the future with technology, working with technology in the immediate future, and then projecting into the next 10 years?
Okay, I think I'm the wrong person to start with, because I don't know what I'm doing next week. I really think that 10 years is a long time, and sometimes people do interviews at work and they say, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? And I think, no, I've got no idea in 10 years' time. Things can change on a dime, they can change. We can come up with something new at any given moment. So I just try to remain hopeful that we can, as far as technology is concerned, negotiate the future, but unfortunately people have shown themselves to be dumb and keep making the same mistakes all the time. As far as the pollution problems going, I was looking at something on YouTube last night, and they were saying that the amount of debris that we've put into outer space, because we consider there's a lot of space there and that we could never fill it. And actually now, when we want to send something up into outer space, we have to work out how to avoid all this rubbish that's out there. I mean, even 10 years ago, I think we didn't imagine that there'd be that amount of debris out there. We just don't see that far ahead into the future.
I think we're the people that are alive at the moment in this room, we're probably the last generations to see the night sky as the night sky. I think we've stopped we have. There's no such thing as the natural space night sky environment at the moment because of the space pollution and the space junk. And that's affecting Indigenous knowledge systems and cultures and ways of being. It's infecting the biosphere and animals and plants and everybody else who we co-inhabit this planet with. So much space pollution. I'm going to hand over to Ian to respond to that question. You use technology in your work as well to some degree.
Yeah, when working as a scientist for 40 years or something, technology was absolutely part of what we did. And in that time, we're incredibly fortunate to live through a whole series of scientific revolutions. And I was working in biology, but it wasn't just in biology, it was in physics, chemistry, right across the board. So the science that I knew by the time I retired 10 years ago compared to when I first started in 1972 or something, was radically different. And a lot of that was driven by technology. And I used to use really fancy microscopes was part of my work. And one of the things that new technology automatically generates uncertainty because you don't know what you're going to see with the new stuff. And sometimes it might be something really good, and sometimes it might be, oh, I've seen that before, and that technology was sort of died, didn't provide things. But every time new instrumentations come out in science, it's opened up a new window, literally. This is something we didn't know about how the world works, and it's totally unpredictable because, in the words of some horrible American politician, I think you don't know what you don't know. So we had fancy microscopes which let us see things we'd never seen before, and people weren't even sure if you could see them or not. So that's one really important thing. So new technology can open up new ways of looking at the world, new ways of understanding the world. But then there are all the unintended consequences. And as Niki just said, all the space junk, and here in South Australia we have a world expert in space junk, Alice Gorman at Flinders Uni. There's all the wonderful technology we're using right now, or the radio technology in this, and the fancy cameras around the place, which are 10 times better than what they were 10 years ago. The unintended consequences of that is, first of all, the requirement for all of the rare earth metals which go into all the electronics, into the chips and all the transmitters and everything, and all the consequences on that on the environment all around the world, especially in developing nations, which a lot of this stuff comes from. And then you've got the problem of what to do with it when we're finished with it. And technology is not going to, I mean, there'll be a technological solution to some of that, but a lot of it's not the technology, it's how people interact with it and how people set value judgments. And as Niki said, the word she used was narrative. How you forge a narrative through this great morass of things which may or may not matter. And you don't know sometimes until it's too late.
That reminds me, thank you, Ian. We'll go to Catherine next. It reminds me of that concept of people paths when urban designers design a city street and they put the footpath out there, but then the humans come along and start walking the shortcut, which is just there, and then after a period of time there's a worn dirt people path that the urban designers never kind of conceptualized. Once humans start navigating and inhabiting those kind of architectural built environments, and it's a bit like that with technology until it starts becoming generative and the humans don't really have control over what the machine starts to do. Catherine, technology in 10 years.
Technology, I think of technology at a very basic level, particularly with the project we've been doing. I keep on thinking that every inch is actually undisturbed. There's not a centimetre of land almost now that hasn't been disturbed or altered in some way by humans. But we don't I think a part of us must know that. Surely we must know that. But I think the people that come to Carrick Hill don't think about that. They think it's always been like that and it will be like that forever. It just is like that. The fact is that John works extremely hard to make it like that.
Thank you, John.
There are a lot of
Good work.
machinery and bits and pieces behind the scenes to make it look like an oasis. Apart from that, but the sense is this. I'm speaking as a member of the general public now. That there's, it seems to be a new consciousness at the moment about AI, which has been with us for a very long time. But it feels like there's a fear that it will outrun us. My fear is that it'll outrun itself. I think that's the next step. It's going to outrun itself, and that's why being human needs to be put under a microscope even more now, the very basic, what makes us human, this is really kind of all I've got to carry me through. I know that science has helped us augment our bodies greatly, and to great use. It's helped us see a lot more, but what we do with that knowledge is very variable. So I have to be curious, and I have to, I'm at the stage now where I'm thinking, well, what are my values as an individual within this whole field of uncertainty? What are my personal values? How can I think beyond my own lifespan to a future that is hopeful? How can I alter my life now to make sure that it happens for someone else?
Thank you. Deirdre?
So, Catherine, just picking up on your point about, the future or the present of AI. So I think that's going to dramatically change the relationships artists have with technology. And also, it's almost like an existential shift. So, for example, because traditionally and historically, art is about the human. It's about that human endeavor. Obviously there are lots of artists, everyone here works with technology, but I think there is always a human presence. And I think, because my practice is really all about, I interrogate optical technologies. That's what my practice is about. That's why I really enjoy looking back in kind of using a media archaeological lens to look back at historical technologies to see how they were used, how they were kind of, applied culturally and socially, and even back to the Greeks, where this word techne was meant, to bring us closer to ourselves as humans. And I think AI is shifting that. I think it's a massive change. But I don't think, I think there's good and bad, but I think that's why it's really important for artists as kind of activism pointing out these things, making them visible, because I also think technology in relation to not just our practice, but humans in general, it's about different visibilities and invisibilities and who controls that. And I think particularly with the direction we're headed, there's always been a control of technology is designed to grab our attention and focus it in a particular way while hiding, for example, the device in plain sight. We're focused on the image. And so I think making sure that we constantly bring awareness to the technologies, how they're doing what they're doing, and who's controlling and designing them and to what purpose, I think is very important for the future of artistic practice.
Thank you. And that's a beautiful close to today's conversation, and thank you so much for the questions. Before we close off, I just want to also put something else into everybody's thinking around technology and futures and 10 years, and the idea of First Nations knowledge systems as technologies as well. Brad DARKSON, who's been involved in this project, is using fire as a technology. And so there's this whole other thread of Aboriginal and First Nations peoples that are working in these fields and areas of inquiry as well. and who have great contributions to make towards the directions of the next 10 years and our concepts and ideas of technology. So that's an interesting thing for us to also ponder and consider. And I'd really like to thank all of our artists and speakers here today, so please join me. I'll also take this opportunity to very much thank Ed James and the Newmarch team, Phil, our wonderful sound tech person, Joel and Zach from Click Films. And you will have seen Click Films here today, and what they're doing is we're making another episode of this from some of the footage today in the exhibition called Spectrovision, and it will be released on the ANAT website and through our media networks. So I advise you all to go to ANAT's website, which is www.anat.org.au. It's supposed to be on a slide. And then also there's the Uni SA is one of our partners, and that's their URL. We also have a monthly newsletter, and it's a great way to stay in touch. And before we finish completely, I also want to, with all my heart, thank Team ANAT, Jen Brazier, Carolyn Kavanagh and Oshaf Vidisto for keeping things going for a year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.